Someone here faced off with a mountain lion. Anna, you have to tell us that story.
Yeah, that was in my days when I was a solo climber. And yeah, I was had to start really early because the weather was supposed to be bad. And kept turning around every so often just to make sure nothing was following me. And at one point, sure enough, there it was. So yeah, we had a very, very tense face off. And I was like making all kinds of noise and, had my trekking poles in the air to kind of scare it off. And the stupid thing moved closer. So, after a while of kind of that face off, I just started going up the trail with, backwards and kept looking around and it never followed me. So, whew.
Wow. Okay. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm just looking in the chat. So many great stories. Meatloaf paid for my first tattoo. Wow. These are amazing. Jacqueline used to be a therapist specializing in helping children recover from abuse.
That's right. I came to Dallas to be a therapist. And now I'm a realtor and I work for an animal serving agency.
Wow. Well, we are so excited to have you all here today. Welcome to the Friday Animal Welfare Leadership Roundup call. We are officially more than 2 years into these calls with more than 2,000 people having registered for these calls. Allison, I can't remember the latest number, but I know it's significant. And we're so happy you're here today. My name is Kristen. If you are new to these calls, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're from. And we always love to meet new people. The question of today has been surprising to say the least. It is, tell us something about you that is unexpected or surprises people. We have a really cool meeting today. It's the first of its kind. We're trying something brand new. And so we're going to want your feedback on this. We have found that some of the most amazing, relevant speakers are people that we're just not famous enough to get to come on the call. So we're trying something different today. We're going to hear just a little bit from one of those folks and then have a conversation about their talk. So really glad you're here. And before we get started, Mary Smith couldn't be with us today, but she asked us to invite Rory Adams to speak in her place for our mission, our Mary Mission moment, presented today by Rory Adams of American Pets Alive. So Rory, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm Rory Adams. I'm the Education and Training Manager for APA for Awesome Pets Alive, American Pets Alive, and Human and Animal Support Services. I'm honored to be invited to kick off today's call. Thank you to Mary and others at Maddie's Fund. Today, I wanted to bring a little bit of awareness to some things that are happening in the larger world outside of animal welfare. As some of you know, I'm a trans person, a transgender person. I want to first shout out to all of my trans and queer family on the call. I'm here for you. Reach out if you want to talk about what's next or are looking for some support in this very uneasy time. So queer and transgender people really do need support and awareness more than ever right now. We've been in a long battle. It's really been decades long. We've lost a lot of people in queer history, a lot of elders who would have been leading us through this conversation through the HIV/AIDS crisis. So I always like to just remind people when we are having this conversation too, that transgender people have existed on the planet across communities and across cultures for as long as there has been gender. So we are in history, regardless of how invisible or marginalized we may be. We've been here, we're here, we'll always be here. And this conversation really is to just bring some awareness that there are now 19 states that currently have anti-transgender bills and legislation. There are 39 states with proposed legislation that is anti-trans, and in some cases anti-LGBTQAI+. So here in Texas, for example, all 30 plus of the anti-trans bills that were filed this session are officially dead. Most of them are attacks on transgender youth, but there will likely be a special session in June to push the bills through that died. One of the sort of most alarming things that is happening is parents of trans people being reported to Child Protective Services, considering parenting transgender youth child abuse. So what can we do? I will be in Florida for HSUS. I'm going to be speaking there on Wednesday about trauma and mental health and how to bring some training and development and awareness to our organizations. I'll also be hosting a roundtable about transgender inclusivity if you're interested, and I'll also be holding space at the Maddie's booth. Thank you so much to Maddie for allowing me that opportunity. We're also going to do a meetup for queer folks and queer allied folks who want to meet each other and figure out what we can do next as a collective. We have a huge opportunity here as people who are leaders of nonprofit organizations, leaders in municipal government, to really understand that this is not a single issue. This affects your communities, this affects your volunteers, this affects your staff members. And this is a really important moment for us to all act collectively towards liberation and transgender rights. And always want to just point out that the folks that are really most affected by this type of legislation and by this type of hate are Black trans women, Black transgender women, and Latina transgender women. If you are interested in understanding more, please reach out to me. I will put my information in the chat. If you want to find more information, I will put a link to the story in Texas that's happening right now. And if you're looking for a place to donate, I would recommend donating to the Transgender Law Center. And if you're looking for local groups to understand what's happening locally, I would start at the Transgender Law Center. I'm also happy to connect y'all and help you look for organizations that are more local and understand what's happening in your communities on a local level. So thank you so much for having me and for allowing me space to just bring some awareness here to what is happening in our community. And if we could all just be, hold a little bit of space and be gentle with those of us who are going through this at this time, that'd be great. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Rory. And we're going to be hearing from you again in just a couple of minutes. So we're going to turn now to Maddie's Fund. Kelly and the Maddie's Fund folks are here to announce our March grant giveaway. So if you have been waiting, hoping it is you who's chosen this month, you're about to find out. So Kelly, over to you.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. And I don't even know how to follow Rory. Rory, thank you so much for just being you. We all appreciate you and love you so much. And I wish I was going to Expo. I could give you a big hug. So here's a big virtual hug for you. All right. So I get the honor today to announce our March grant giveaway winners. Oh, y'all, who is so excited? So I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share, and I'm going to share the winners. And then if they are on this call, I would love them to pop on and say hey. So let me share my screen real quick. All right. And can someone tell me if they see my screen?
We do.
And the PowerPoint. Awesome.
You might want to make it
Yep, let me
presenter view.
Yep. All right. So as a reminder, anytime you watch this call, whether it's live or I almost said in person. We're not doing these in person. Live or on demand, you can enter to win a grant from Maddie's fund. And y'all, this is so much fun that we get to give away money. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. I will drop the link to enter to win in the chat. So just because you're on the call doesn't mean you're automatically entered to win. You do need to fill out a quick, very, very short little form. It's like 5 questions. So let's do this. This month we have 2 winners of $2,500 each. Our first winner is Donnell Randolph, Oakland Animal Services in Oakland, California. And Philip Zimmerman is our second winner in the city of Sacramento, in Sacramento, California. Congratulations, Donnell and Philip. Hey, are y'all on the call?
I am. Thank you guys so much.
Oh,
It was
you're
unexpected.
welcome. Oh, you are so welcome. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Donnell, and what you think you might do with the money.
Sure. I'm the Human Animal Support Services Coordinator at Oakland Animal Services. And I hope we're able to do more access to care and things like that. So that's what I'm hoping to do.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, happy Friday. And Philip, are you on the call, Philip?
I am, but it's a very early morning for me, so I cannot show my face.
Okay.
It was a late night last night, so having a late start this morning. Again, thank you. I get the pleasure of saying that, I got to work with Donnell in the city of Stockton. So loving seeing all the great things he's doing. Thank you. We get so much support in Sacramento from our local community, from our national orgs. So this is just another great thing that reminds me of why we do what we do. We have so much support. Again, what we're doing a lot in Sacramento is getting out into our community. We've been doing monthly vaccination clinics since October of 2020, where we provide free vaccines, microchips, leashes, collars, pet food, dog houses. That's really where we've been putting a lot of our focus on serving our community. Access to care is a huge thing in our community. We're very lucky that we have a nonprofit that is funding veterinary assistance to own pets. We've been able to keep 200 to 300 animals out of the shelter every year by providing that veterinary care. And it's unfortunately very expensive. So we're working on a big project. Our nonprofit wants to open. Well, I guess I should say I want them to open a low cost to no cost veterinary clinic because our community very much needs it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks so much, Philip, for everything you were doing, and keep it up. And you too, Donnell, and congratulations. Our grants team will be in touch with both of you about your payments. And for everyone else, I'm going to put the link in to enter to win for April. All right, y'all. Happy Friday.
Okay, we have a lot to get to today. I'm going to have plenty of time for our discussion. So can we have just brief updates, please, from National Arcs? If you either want to jump in or share your update in the chat, now is the time.
Hey everybody, it's Valerie Shepard from the Association for Animal Welfare Advancement, and we will be back in Chicago. Yay! June 15th to 17th. I'll put the link in the chat. Our spring conference has 4 tracks in shelter medicine, fundraising, resilience, and management and governance. So something for everybody, and we hope we'll see you there. I'm done.
Hey everybody, it's Kathy from Canada. Just a quick reminder that you can still register either online or in person for the Humane Canada Summit for Animals. And news flash, today's the last day for a flash sale for online registrations. You can get up to 45% off, which means you American folks will pay next to nothing. Talk to you soon.
Hey everybody, Alexis Pugh here from the NACA Board of Directors. Just want to remind everybody that next week is ACO Appreciation Week. So please make sure you're doing something for your teams internally. At NACA, we've got a bunch of stuff we're going to be doing online. So you can tag us into that, tag us into what you're doing, share what we're doing. We've got some thank you videos, but please make sure you have that on your radar all next week. Say thank you to your team. And also our next board meeting is on the 14th, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. This month, we are being joined by the United Horse Coalition. So if you're interested in horse resources, this is the month to come attend that NACA open meeting on the 14th. And I'll see many of you at HSUS Animal Care Expo at the NACA table. Please make sure to stop by and see us.
Hey everyone, Charlotte from Maddie's Fund here. I just wanted to let everyone know that this month in Maddie's Pet Forum, we're doing another resource drive. This month, we're focusing on all things fostering. So a shameless picture of two of my 5 current foster kitties as my new profile picture here. But again, our goal is to build up a section of our resource library with all sorts of foster manuals, trainings, anything you've got. So anyone who contributes on the post will be entered to win a little $50 gift card as a thank you for your time. So I'll drop the link in the chat and I hope to see you all in the forum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And next week on the Friday call, it will be our last Friday call before Expo, and then we'll have a break for Expo. And next week, because it is Animal Control Appreciation Week, we are going to be focusing on innovation in field services, animal control, animal protection. The folks at NACA and a couple of others will be bringing you the biggest, best ideas in innovation in animal control. There's so much happening in the field, and most folks just don't even know it's happening. If you are innovating in big or small ways in field services, we need to hear from you. We want to include you on the call next week. So please just drop me a message in the chat during this call with your contact information, or alternatively, I will give you my contact information and reach out. But next week, we really want to talk about the future of animal control and all the cool stuff ACOs are doing around the country. So we're going to turn back now, and I'm going to hand over this call to my colleagues, Clare, Callison, and Rory Adams, for something that we've never tried before. And so we really are going to want to hear your feedback on this one. So if you are here, it's okay to be on phone. It's okay to be on screen. If you're watching, it's even better. But we're going to do this call, and then we want to hear your feedback, because one of the challenges is that there are some speakers that are we're just not famous enough to get on the call yet. And we still need to hear from them because they have really important messages for animal welfare. And so we're going to share something from one of those speakers today and then have a discussion about it. And so we're going to want to hear your feedback at the end. So we'll be next week polling you on what you thought about this call as we try some new things this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clare and Rory. And thank you both so much for being here and for talking about this.
Thank you so much. And always so excited when Clare and I get to do this important work and bring it to spaces. So just a little bit of background about why we're here and what we're doing today. Clare and I are leading our internal diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging strategy at APA, at Austin Pets Alive, American Pets Alive, and Human and Animal Support Services. What that means right now is that we're working with a consultancy for the next year for our executive leaders from all 3 arms of that organization to go through pretty intensive year-long training so that we're all speaking the same language and kind of coming from the same place with what we even mean by equity. So by the end of this year, we'll be moving into, we'll be working on setting a strategy, and we'll have a vision as an organization for what this means for our work moving forward. But we led our internal teams through a discussion that we were hoping now to bring to you. Claire, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I would just say that, going through this, we're going to share a video that was shared with us, and really encouraging everyone at the end of this to think about, we're going to lead a discussion after we watch this TED Talk, but would encourage everyone to think about how they can bring this home to their organizations. I would say this leadership training, we are not going to take credit for creating this, agenda. This was something that was shared with us and was so impactful that we felt we want to share with all of you, and just thinking about ways that you all could lead similar discussions in your organizations at home. And this video is completely, has changed the way I view things and is inspiring. So we're really honored to share that with you today.
Thanks, Claire. Okay, so we're just gonna get right to it, and feel free while we're watching this to, turn your camera off or do what you need to do. A good opportunity to stretch or whatever you need to do. So we'll be in the background here too. Okay. So this is a TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie, who, if you are not familiar with her work, she's an author inspired by Nigerian history and tragedy, and is a novelist and storyteller. We have about 17 minutes left. And what we are going to do next, I'm going to hand over to Claire, and we're going to set some guidelines quickly, and then move into some questions for y'all.
Thanks, Rory. And I can put these in the chat. But as we move forward, we're really eager to hear. I know everyone's brains were moving quickly this morning, and it's a lot to take in her TED Talk. But before we jump into the conversation discussion piece of this, we wanted to set some guidelines in our discussion. So I'll go through them now and also put them in the chat so you have them. But it's okay for all of us to be at different places with the things we discussed today. We would urge everyone to speak from an I perspective instead of we perspectives. So from your point of view, and not speak in generalities and we's. Take space, make space, and hold space. So being mindful of if you've already spoken and unmuted, maybe additional thoughts could go in the chat, and then that would allow space for others to speak. And also don't be afraid to speak up today. We encourage people to be brave and vulnerable, and have this discussion with us. And then recognizing that some discomfort can be useful for learning, and accept non-closure. And then lastly, confidentiality. So lessons leave, but stories stay. We want to make sure we have over almost 200 people on the call. So making sure that this is a safe place, and we're supportive of each other. So we will put that in the chat. Thank you for that, Rory. So we'll move into the first question. Rory, did you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. And are there any other, I guess before we move into that, are there any other, if there are any other Brave Space guidelines that y'all want to add to what Claire and I have brought here today, feel free to go ahead and pop those in the chat as well. And the one that I am working on, is speaking from an I perspective. I think we all kind of, not all of us, I know for me, see, I just did it, right? I know for me, I struggle with that. So I'm trying to speak more from I statement, and really love that challenge. So, all right, moving into a couple of discussion questions. The first one is, what is one takeaway from Chimamanda's TED Talk this morning, if you have one? Oh, Emily, thank you. You're asking that when we speak up, can we introduce with pronouns? Absolutely. And I failed to do that myself. So my pronouns are he or they, either are fine.
Thank you, Rory, for taking that question of mine. My name's Emily. My pronouns are she, her. And one of the takeaways that I had from the TED Talk, I really liked the quote that she gave that said, you know, I think it was like, stereotypes aren't necessarily untrue or unhelpful, but they're just not the whole story. Because, you know, sometimes, you know, we stereotype based on all different kinds of reasons. And just because you fall into a stereotype doesn't mean it's a bad thing. A lot of people are proud that they're stereotypically X, Y, or Z, but there's always more to someone than just that. You know, no one fits perfectly into that shiny box. So I thought that was just really interesting for her to say. Let me share.
Thanks so much, Emily, for stepping forward and sharing that. And there's a couple of comments in the chat as well. Did anybody else have any takeaways that y'all wanted to share with us and with the group? And we'll go ahead and put the second question in the chat too, because maybe it will help us to keep the conversation flowing here. So the second question, what single stories have been told about you or people like you? So feel free to answer either or both of those questions.
Hi all, it's Kathy from Canada and I identify as she, her. One of the most powerful pieces that came to me from that TED Talk was that the single story robs people of humanity. And I think that that was such a succinct indication of what only listening to the single story can do to the people around you. So that's what I took away really strongly.
This is Cindy, she, her. And I was just struck by how graceful she was in, you know, addressing situations or giving grace to other people for their perspectives on their single stories. And it seemed like she did a really good job weaving in how she could understand the other side of the story, having had some experiences herself where she did that to other people. In relation to the single story for me, immediately came to mind, I'm the youngest of 13 children. My entire life, when I've said that to people, they say, oh, so your family is Catholic. And we happen to be. However, I like to believe that's not the only reason we have 13 children. It's because my parents loved each other and loved us. And that was what our story was meant to be as a family. So I'll answer both in one fell swoop.
Thanks so much, Cindy. And thanks, Kathy, for reminding us that single stories steal humanity. I think that that really stuck out for me as well. Thanks for bringing that. And thanks for being vulnerable with us all, Cindy, and sharing that about yourself and about the single story that you experienced in your life. We really appreciate that. I appreciate that. Does anybody else want to share either of these questions? Claire, anything that you want to add?
No, absolutely. I agree. Those takeaways were really powerful for me as well. And thank you for being vulnerable and adding to the conversation. I am curious too, when we look at our work, I can put it in the chat here, but what single stories get told in the animal welfare space around people? I know we have them about companion animals. That can be a follow-up question, but specifically about people, what single stories are being told in our work in animal welfare? And feel free to unmute and share what comes to mind.
I'll go ahead. Hi, I'm Veronica Wheeler with HRA. My pronouns are she, her. I think that the single story that we've all disproven over the last couple of years is that animal welfare people are not people. We're animal people, but I think our groups here have proven that we are human and animal people. Yeah, and I to go along with the presentation, the talk, and just my own single story, I think that the single story is detrimental because it can be, I should say, a manifestation. If you're telling a child, that this is their single story, how does that impact their development and who they become? So I think that's something always to keep in mind when we look at single stories or trying to impart single stories on individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah, really powerful. There's a lot of good comments in the chat as well. From it sounds like perspectives on people that work in animal welfare industry, our views on them, as well as people that are using shelter services such as the pet food pantry, and people that are needing support, such as people suffering from hoarding and other items in here. And then also I see that we're jumping into talking about perspective of companion animals as well, single stories about companion animals, about pit bulls, about young animals with behavior issues. So I think it's important that we separate those two things. So I know that was two questions in one, but I really appreciate focusing on the people aspect and then a separate issue talking about animals. So thank you all for making that difference.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. And I think there are so many single stories that are told through the barriers that we have in place, right, for foster and adoption at organizations, and just have been sort of as an industry bringing more and more awareness to. So things like people that are not homeowners not being as reliable as people who have homes. And then I think too, just one of the single stories that I have sort of noticed a lot over the last couple of years, since there's been more and more attention to anti-oppression and animal welfare, and anti-racism and animal welfare, is this conversation where we say that leadership in animal welfare is all or primarily white women, which I think there's some truth to that, but it's not entirely the whole story, right? There are lots of leaders in animal welfare that are people of color. It's just the space and attention and getting to do the glamorous work is maybe not our history here in animal welfare. So just want to sort of name that. I think that single story sometimes is coming from a place of care and wanting to sort of like call out that there's a lot of, it is very homogenous in animal welfare, but want to make sure that we're not sort of discrediting the leaders of color that are also in spaces like, like Clare Callison here today, who leads me every day, and I learn from every single day. So thank you, Clare. Any other thoughts when we think about the people in animal welfare, either on the other side of the desk or, our staff and leaders within our own organizations, and single stories that we tell about each other?
Emily, she, they. it occurs to me that sometimes as we expand our reach and start telling stories about folks that we may not have engaged in the past or have maybe excluded in the past, or had a much more severe story about, like if you need the pet food pantry, you don't deserve a pet, that we replace those with also not exactly true and simplistic stories about why maybe some folks don't have access to spay neuter services because they don't want them. And just thinking about how filling in those news stories is not necessarily bad. It's not quite right, but it's on a path, and I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing that. Super important.
I would love to share, Melissa, I'm not sure if she's comfortable unmuting, but her comment really struck me in the chat, that she really, it was a powerful talk. She admired how gracefully Chimamanda spoke about these generalizations and stereotypes. And then she said it left me wondering about all the other times she was and was not able to address those stereotypes and the impact that had on her life. And it really leads us to our final questions as we wrap this up. This discussion is, how do we disrupt these single stories? So we know we have come across them, but what is our role and how do we disrupt them? That's a more complicated question, but feel free to unmute and or share in the chat. Absolutely, we're hearing ask more questions and also heard share your own story and let people tell their story themselves. Absolutely. We'd love to hear from one person if they're interested in sharing with us. That's okay. We're getting good stuff in the chat too.
I can speak up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melissa.
My name is Melissa. I also identify as she, her. I think just approaching every conversation with openness and without that judgment to allow someone to speak their truth. I had added before, making assumptions about somebody making a decision to rehome a pet and creating an artificial separation without understanding the circumstances around it. And that can apply in so many ways to our area.
Thanks so much, Melissa. And thanks, Claire, for bringing up that really important question of what can we do to disrupt these single stories. Maybe something that we can all do, as Claire suggested as well, is bring this TED Talk to our organizations and share it with our people and start continuing this conversation as a starting place. So if anybody, we will share our slide deck out with y'all. So you have the Brave Space guidelines, the link to the TED Talk and some discussion questions, and excited to keep having conversations like this with y'all. Thank you so much. Claire, do you have anything you want to close with?
We are out of time, and I want to thank both of you for being here and for sharing. Thank you so much. Next week, we will be talking about innovation in animal protection, and then we have Expo coming up. You'll get to hear Rory speak at Expo on related issues, because some of the ground he covered today. And thanks so much for being here. And we'll get your feedback on this call next week to see if this is something that we want to try again in the future. And thanks to both of you for leading us in a brand new kind of call.
Yeah, absolutely. Claire, do you have anything you want to close with?
Nope, just thanking everyone for all of their input and being so open with sharing. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.